The first time Eli saw the bear up close, it had been standing in the meadow, framed by the evening light, watching him without fear. Over the years, the visits became a quiet habit, the bear arriving as the sun lowered, Eli staying still so it would linger. But last spring, Eli did something different. He built a second rocking chair, wide and solid, and placed it beside his own. The next evening, the bear didn't just stand in the meadow, it climbed onto the porch. Eli had lived in the cedar cabin at the edge of Redwood Hollow for nearly 30 years. He'd built it himself back when his hands were steadier and his back didn't protest every dawn. These days, his workbench saw less use, but the porch, with its creaking floorboards and the single rocking chair worn smooth by decades of evenings, was his favorite place to be. Out here, the world slowed down enough to match the pace of his thoughts. The bear first appeared one late summer, when the meadow behind his cabin was awash in goldenrod and the air smelled faintly of pine sap and warm earth. Eli had been sipping black coffee, watching the sun melt into the horizon, when he noticed a movement at the tree line. A massive brown bear, its coat thick and catching the amber light, stepped into the open. For a long moment, neither moved. Eli had seen plenty of bears from a distance, but this one didn't behave like the others. It didn't nose around for scraps or hurry away at the sight of him. It simply stood there, looking in his direction, as though weighing the distance between them. Eli remembered speaking aloud, quietly, "Evening." The bear's ears twitched, but it didn't move closer. It stayed until the last sliver of sun dropped behind the ridge, then turned back into the trees. That was the start of it. Through the years, the visits became a rhythm Eli could measure the seasons by. In winter, there'd be a long absence, the meadow covered in snow and the world feeling emptier for it. But come spring, when the grass began to green and the creek thawed, he'd see the bear again. Always at sunset. Always stopping just far enough to keep a safe, unspoken boundary between them. He never tried to feed it, he knew better than that. But sometimes he'd leave the porch light off so the glow of the setting sun was all that lay between them. He learned to read its body language, the slow sway of its head when it was relaxed, the way it would glance at the sky as if taking stock of the evening. Last spring, something changed. Eli noticed the bear lingering longer than usual, even after the sun had slipped away and the first cool shadows spread across the meadow. It didn't seem in any hurry, and Eli, without really thinking about it, stayed in his chair until the chill chased him inside. That night, he found himself lying awake, thinking about that still figure at the edge of the trees. The next morning, he was out in the shed before the kettle had even boiled. He ran his hands along the old planks stacked against the wall, remnants from the oak he'd milled years ago. Thick, solid boards that could hold weight. He didn't know if he was being foolish, but the idea had already taken root, a second rocking chair. Not for a person. For the bear. It took him nearly a week to build. His hands, though slower, still remembered the old skills. Each joint was measured twice, each curve of the armrest sanded smooth. The seat was wide, the legs reinforced with crossbeams thick enough to bear hundreds of pounds. When it was done, he oiled the wood until it shone like honey in the sunlight. That evening, he placed it beside his own chair on the porch. It looked almost comical, 2 chairs facing the meadow, one human-sized, one built for a giant. He wasn't sure the bear would even notice. Maybe it would sniff the air, tilt its head, and go back into the trees. But the possibility of it accepting the invitation was enough to make him feel like a boy again, waiting for something magical and impossible. The sun was low when he heard the familiar shift in the meadow's stillness. There it was, the bear, emerging from the shadow line, its fur glowing copper where the light touched it. Eli didn't move, only nodded once in greeting. The bear paused at the usual spot, and then took a step closer. Eli's heart thudded against his ribs. The bear moved slowly, each footfall deliberate, as though testing the ground for hidden rules. When it reached the porch steps, it stopped, scenting the air. Its gaze flicked to the second chair. Eli kept his voice even, low. "It's yours, if you want it." The bear tilted its head, then, to Eli's astonishment, climbed the first step. The porch creaked under its weight. Another step, then another, until the animal stood level with the chairs. It turned in a slow circle, as if considering, then lowered itself into the oversized seat. The wood groaned once but held. For a long time, neither moved. They simply sat there, man and bear, watching the sky burn orange and pink over the ridge. Eli didn't smile, didn't reach out, didn't try to make it more than it was. It was enough to share the same space, breathing the same air, watching the same sun go down. When the last light faded, the bear stood, gave a small shake of its coat, and stepped back into the shadows. Eli stayed seated, the smell of warm fur and meadow grass lingering in the air long after the night closed in. From that evening on, the chair stayed where it was, always angled just slightly toward the horizon like Eli's own. For the first few nights, the bear didn't return. Eli half wondered if it had been a one-time miracle, a wild animal indulging in a strange moment, never to be repeated. But on the fourth evening, when the sun was just beginning to lower, he saw the familiar shape moving through the tall grass. It came at the same pace as before, unhurried, deliberate. When it reached the porch, it didn't hesitate at the steps. This time, it went straight to the chair and sat, lowering its bulk with surprising care. The wood creaked faintly under the weight, but Eli had built it well. They sat like that again, in silence. Occasionally, the bear would lift its head to scent the wind, nostrils flaring slightly, before settling back into stillness. Eli found himself mirroring its movements, breathing a little deeper, watching the line where the sky met the treetops. As the days passed, the visits grew more regular. The bear seemed to prefer arriving just before the most vivid part of the sunset, staying until the last threads of orange dissolved into blue. Sometimes Eli would talk in a quiet voice, not expecting understanding, but offering something of himself anyway. Stories about building the cabin. Memories of storms that had rattled the windows. Even the ache in his knees when rain was coming. He never used the bear's name because it didn't have one, and because names made things smaller, more human, and this was something else entirely. It was a presence, and the presence didn't need naming. Then came the evening with the breeze. A warm current pushed down from the ridge, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp earth. The bear lifted its head almost immediately, turning toward the forest as though listening for something far away. Eli noticed the shift in posture, not alarm, exactly, but focus. "You smell something?" Eli asked quietly. The bear stayed still for a long moment, then slowly looked back toward the meadow, as if deciding it could stay a little longer. But that night, it left sooner than usual. Eli sat alone for a while afterward, the sky darkening into a deep indigo, wondering what had called it away. The next afternoon, Eli went into town for supplies. At the hardware store, he mentioned the bear to Doug behind the counter, who had lived in the area even longer than Eli had. Doug just grinned and said, "You and that bear are gonna end up in the paper one day. Just make sure it's not the obituaries." Eli chuckled, But as he drove home with lumber and nails in the truck bed, he found himself thinking about what Doug had said. Was this dangerous? Was he making a mistake? He'd never fed the bear, never made any move to close the gap further than it wanted. But still, he was building a habit with a wild thing. And habits could be broken in ways that hurt. That evening, the bear returned. It carried something small in its mouth, a sprig of wildflowers, stems bound together by a twist of dried grass. It didn't drop them on the porch or offer them in any way. Instead, it climbed into its chair, keeping the flowers between its paws as it settled. Eli felt his throat tighten. He didn't know if this was a gift, a comfort object, or simply something the bear had picked up along the way. But as the two of them sat side by side, the flowers resting gently against the curve of the bear's paw, Eli realized the balance between them had shifted. This wasn't just an animal tolerating his presence. This was a ritual, shared and intentional. When the sun finally dropped and the bear rose to leave, it left the flowers on the seat. Eli waited until it disappeared into the trees before picking them up. They were already wilting, the petals fragile under his touch, but he carried them inside and placed them in a jar on the kitchen table. That night, Eli didn't sleep much. He kept thinking about the moment the bear had climbed onto the porch, flowers still in its grasp. About the way it had glanced at him once, and not in a way that asked for anything. More like it was confirming something it had already decided. The next morning, he sanded the armrests of the bear's chair until the wood felt like river stone under his fingertips. He reinforced the legs again, tightening bolts that didn't strictly need it. Then, almost without realizing, he began carving a pattern into the top rail, a simple curve of pine trees and a horizon line, like the view they shared every evening. When the bear returned that night, the carving was still fresh, the wood pale against the darker grain. Eli sat in his own chair, waiting to see if the animal would notice. It did. Before sitting, the bear leaned forward, sniffing the new grooves. It didn't touch them, but its head tilted in a way that made Eli believe it understood the chair had changed, had been worked on for it. Then it settled into place, the same slow, deliberate way as always, paws resting easily on the armrests as the sky turned molten gold. They sat until the first stars appeared, and for the first time Eli allowed himself to think, we're both waiting for something. And maybe, one of these days, we'll know what it is. The flowers stayed in the jar on Eli's kitchen table for days. He changed the water each morning, though it didn't stop the petals from curling in on themselves, their colors fading into muted memory. When they were finally too far gone, he didn't throw them away. Instead, he pressed them between two pieces of parchment and slid them into the back of an old ledger, where he kept receipts for lumber and faded pencil sketches of past projects. That week, the bear came every evening without fail. Each time, it went directly to its chair, sat down, and looked out at the horizon as though the day's business ended here. Eli found comfort in the pattern, the scrape of the chair legs as the bear settled, the faint scent of warm fur carried on the cool breeze, the slow rhythm of breathing beside him. It was easy to forget how extraordinary it all was. On Thursday, the weather turned. A slow-moving front brought thick, rolling clouds and a light drizzle that made the meadow smell sharp and green. Eli assumed the bear wouldn't come in the rain. He was wrong. As the sun dipped, more a pale glow than a blaze, he spotted the familiar shape moving through the wet grass. Water clung to its coat, darkening the fur and making it look almost black in the fading light. It climbed the porch steps, shook itself once, and lowered into the chair without hesitation. Eli couldn't help but laugh softly. You're a stubborn one, I'll give you that. They sat in the damp air, rain ticking softly against the tin roof. The bears first smelled of wet earth and pine, and Eli felt a strange gratitude for its persistence. The sunset was muted, the horizon hidden behind cloud, but it didn't matter. The moment was its own kind of complete. By Saturday, the sun returned. That evening, the bear arrived with something new, a small, smooth river stone, mottled with shades of gray and white. It carried it gently in its mouth and, after settling into the chair, placed it on the armrest. Eli studied the stone, turning his head slightly. You've got an eye for things, don't you? The bear didn't respond, of course, but it kept its paw near the stone for most of the evening. When it finally left, it nudged the stone toward Eli with the side of its paw. Eli picked it up and felt its cool, rounded weight. Like the flowers, it seemed deliberate. Not random. Over the next week, the gifts continued. Sometimes a cluster of pine cones, other times a piece of bark with an unusual curve, once even a single large feather, likely from a hawk. Eli accepted each one without making a show of it, setting them on a low shelf near the porch railing. The collection grew into a quiet testament to their evenings together. One morning, while repairing a loose porch board, Eli found himself wondering about the bear's life beyond their shared sunset ritual. Did it roam alone? Did it have cubs hidden somewhere in the dense forest? He realized he'd never seen another bear nearby, never heard the crack of branches that might signal company. It was always just the two of them. That evening, as the sky deepened into shades of copper and rose, the bear seemed restless. It shifted in its chair, glancing toward the tree-line more than usual. Eli noticed the way its ears twitched, tracking sounds too subtle for him to hear. Something out there, he asked, leaning forward slightly. The bear stood suddenly, its head high, gaze fixed on the darkening forest. Eli felt his own pulse quicken. He followed its line of sight but saw nothing, only the deepening shadows between trunks. Then, just as quickly, the bear relaxed and lowered itself back into the chair. Still, the mood had shifted. Eli found himself watching the trees as much as the sunset, trying to catch what the bear might have sensed. But the evening ended without incident, and when the bear finally left, it did so with its usual slow, deliberate steps. A few days later, Eli was in town picking up groceries when he overheard two men at the diner talking about a cougar sighting near the river bend. Big one of them said. Could take down a deer without a sound. The other man shook his head. Bad year for the cougars. Not enough prey out there. Eli thought of the bear's restlessness. The way it had looked into the trees. And he felt a prickle of unease. Whatever lived in those woods wasn't part of their ritual, but it could disrupt it all the same. That night, the bear arrived later than usual. The sun was already low, streaking the meadow with long shadows. The bear didn't bring anything this time, no flowers, no stones. It climbed into the chair and sat heavily, as though the day had been long. Eli kept his voice gentle. You're welcome here, you know. As long as you want. The bear turned its head toward him for a brief moment, then back to the horizon. Eli wondered, not for the first time, what it saw out there, and what it remembered. When the last light faded, the bear rose and paused before stepping off the porch. It looked back once, and in that look, Eli felt a strange certainty, something was coming. And when it did, it would change their evenings forever. The wind shifted in Redwood Hollow. It wasn't something you could see, not at first, no sudden storm, no heavy weather rolling over the hills. But Eli felt it, the way you feel the air change before the first frost, or the way a room feels when someone walks in without making a sound. Over the next few days, the bear's visits became irregular. Some nights, it came late, the sun already gone and the porch lit only by the dim glow from Eli's kitchen window. Other nights, it didn't come at all. On those evenings, Eli sat alone, the empty oversized chair beside him like a reminder of something he couldn't name. When it did appear, the bear was different, more alert, muscles taut under its thick coat. Its head turned toward the forest more often, ears swiveling to catch faint sounds. Once, Eli heard it give a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the porch floorboards. He didn't ask what it meant. One morning, Eli found tracks in the soft earth near the edge of the meadow. They weren't the bear's, these were more oval, with sharper claw marks, the kind you didn't need a guidebook to identify. Cougar. And not a small one. The prints led toward the creek, then vanished into the dense underbrush. He stood there for a long while, his breath visible in the cool morning air, thinking about the stories he'd heard over the years. Cougars were solitary hunters. They didn't pick fights with animals they couldn't take down. But they also didn't care about a man sitting on his porch, or about some unspoken arrangement between that man and a bear. That evening, Eli stayed outside longer than usual, his coffee cooling in the cup beside him. He kept scanning the meadow and the tree line, waiting. The sun dropped lower, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet, and then he saw movement. The bear emerged from the trees, slower than usual, head low. It climbed the steps but didn't immediately sit. Instead, it stood near the chair, looking toward the woods. Eli followed its gaze but saw nothing, only the shifting shadows as the wind moved through the branches. Finally, the bear settled into the chair, but its posture was different. Restless. Watchful. Eli spoke softly. Whatever's out there, we'll keep an eye out together. The bear stayed until the last hint of daylight was gone. When it left, Eli noticed it took a wide path around the meadow instead of cutting straight through as it usually did. The next afternoon, while stacking firewood, Eli heard a sound that stopped him cold, a sharp, high-pitched cry from somewhere in the forest. It was brief, then followed by silence. He waited, heart pounding, but it didn't come again. He told himself it could have been a bird, maybe a fox. Still, he kept glancing toward the trees until the light began to fade. That night, the bear arrived earlier than usual. And this time, it brought something. Not flowers. Not a stone. In its mouth was a long, weathered branch, stripped of bark, the wood pale and smooth. It set it down on the porch before climbing into its chair. Eli bent forward, studying it. The ends were clean, almost as if they'd been gnawed down to a perfect taper. "You've been working on this," Eli murmured. "Why?" The bear didn't answer, of course. But its eyes, dark and steady, seemed to hold something unspoken. Eli left the branch where it was, leaning against the porch railing. They sat in silence, the air carrying the faint scent of damp soil and wood smoke from a cabin somewhere down the valley. The sun bled into the horizon, a slow burn of orange and red, and for a moment, the tension in the bear's posture eased. Eli found himself wishing the evenings could stay like this forever, quiet, predictable, untouched by whatever stirred in the forest. But just before the light was gone, the bear's head snapped toward the trees. Its body stiffened, ears forward, nostrils flaring. Eli froze, his own breath caught. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. Then, somewhere deep in the pines, a branch cracked. It was a small sound, but it carried in the still air. The bear stayed motionless, eyes fixed on the darkness. Finally, it gave a deep huff, not fear, but warning, before standing. Without looking back, it stepped off the porch and disappeared into the meadow, moving quickly but without panic. Eli sat there long after it was gone, the rocking of his chair slow and uneven. He didn't like not knowing. And he didn't like the feeling that whatever was coming was closer than either of them had realized. Before going inside, he picked up the branch the bear had brought. He ran his hand over the smooth surface, feeling the grooves worn into it by teeth and claws. It was strong, solid. A piece of wood that could last years if cared for. He didn't know if it was meant for him, or if it was just something the bear had carried for comfort. Either way, he set it beside the door, where he could see it every time he stepped outside. That night, sleep came slowly. In the darkness, Eli listened to the wind moving through the pines, each rustle a reminder that the forest was full of life, and not all of it friendly. Somewhere out there, the bear was moving through the same shadows, its path crossing unseen with whatever else called this place home. The next week arrived bright and hard, the kind of blue that makes pines look newly sharpened. Eli worked with the quiet restlessness of someone waiting for a knock that might not come. He split kindling, sharpened chisels that didn't need it, and planed a cupped board flat. Each evening he swept the porch, set both chairs square to the view, and looked away from the meadow on purpose. On Monday the bear didn't come. Tuesday, the same. Wednesday, clouds thinned the light and a jay scolded the empty clearing like it blamed him for the absence. Late spring could pull an animal miles toward new shoots and beetle-rich logs, he told himself, but it didn't help. He carried the pale branch to his bench. The ends were tapered clean, the shaft thick as his wrist. He turned it in his hands until an idea clicked, a stretcher across the front legs of the bear's chair, something for its paws, like a stool's rung. The chair had held fine, but comfort is a language. Maybe the branch was a nudge. He measured twice, marked tenons, and began to cut. The wood surprised him, not pine but tough alder, resilient and springy. He pared shoulders until the fit was butter smooth, then bored mortises in the front legs, careful not to split the grain. By dusk a new crossbar gleamed under the chair. He sat to test it, feet resting where paws might. The posture changed everything, weight settled deeper, back eased. He laughed at himself for learning comfort from a bear. Thursday at sunset the meadow breathed and the bear appeared. Relief hit so suddenly he gripped the armrest. The animal moved slower, left shoulder rolling a little. At the steps the boards thrummed like a low drum. It paused, sniffed the new bar, then lowered itself with the care of a sore body. Eli saw it then, 3 short rakes along the shoulder, not deep but fresh, the skin beneath cleanly scored. Cougar, he thought, or a nail, but the pattern said claws. He kept his voice level. "You're all right," he said. "You made it home." The bear set one paw on the crossbar, then the other. Its breathing lengthened. The change was subtle but unmistakable, the added rest eased something. Eli sat with palms open on his knees, resisting the human urge to fix a wild thing. Respect was the chair, the time, and the room to leave. They watched the sun thread the ridge with brass. A small wind combed the grass in one wide gesture. When the light cooled, the bear stood, tested the shoulder once, then turned. At the step, it nudged the arm with its snout, acknowledgement, and left. Sleep came easier. In the morning Eli checked the meadow's edge for sign. Tracks overlapped in damp clay, the bear's broad, the cat's elliptical. No blood. A tuft of hair on hawthorn confirmed what he knew, brief encounter, warning more than war. He spent the afternoon making 2 small changes that felt like hospitality without trespass. First, he set a galvanized basin near the rail, filled with clean water from the hand pump. Not bait, no food, never food, just a place to drink if the creek felt too far for a tender shoulder. Second, he planed the front step to a longer bevel so weight would land with less bite. That evening the bear returned before color gathered. It went to the basin first, scented it, and drank in 3 steady pulls, tongue flicking like a slow bell. Then it settled, paws finding the alder rung with a certainty that felt like trust. Eli let his shoulders drop. For a sunset, the world was right again. The forest sent news in small dispatches, a nuthatch stitching sound down a trunk, the creek shouldering a branch free, far off a chainsaw biting and then, mercifully, quitting. Twice the bear turned its head toward the east slope. Eli followed the glance and saw only deepening green. Absence, he understood, can be information too. Listen, he said, surprising himself by voicing the thought. If you stop coming, I'll still set the chairs out. I'll keep the crossbar tight. I'll be here. Not a bargain, a record. Saturday a pickup eased down the gravel. Doug from the hardware store climbed out with a sack of screws Eli had forgotten and a pie his wife insisted he deliver. He took in the twin chairs and whistled. So this is the famous set. Lord help me, you actually did it. It's quieter than it looks, Eli said. You sure it's wise? Doug asked, not unkindly. I'm sure it's careful, Eli said. There's a difference. That evening the bear came late, stepping out of a dusk so thick the light seemed to cling to its fur. It didn't sit right away. It padded to the rail and looked past Eli at the bench through the open door, planes, chisels, alder offcuts stacked neat. It drew a long breath as if reading the room, then settled and exhaled a sound that wasn't a sigh but carried the same grammar. They rocked in time, the porch floor translating motion into a conversation older than both of them. Eli felt the ache in his hands ease the way it did when a thing he made earned its place. When full dark gathered, the bear rose and stepped down. At the yard's edge, it stopped and looked back at the chairs, 2 shapes in the doorway's spill of light, then disappeared into the trees. Eli stood a little longer than usual. The alder rung caught lamplight like a pale crescent. He touched it once, a benediction for wood and weight. He didn't know it yet, but the surprise was already on its way, following the bear's path at a slower, smaller pace, learning the porch boards by listening to them, measuring the door's glow against new eyes. The next sunset would not bring 1 traveler to the chair, but 2. The morning after that quiet, measured visit, Eli woke to the smell of rain. Not a storm, just the kind that whispers across the roof and hangs in the air like breath on glass. He stepped onto the porch barefoot, mug in hand, and let the boards cool his soles. The meadow swayed under the drizzle, each blade tipped with a bead of silver. He checked the alder rung, still tight, no swelling from the moisture. The basin by the rail held a shallow pool, a single pine needle floating in it like a compass without a north. There were no new tracks in the dirt, only the faint ghosts of paw and claw from the night before. He told himself not to wait all day, but habit is a stubborn thing. He worked in the shed, planing down a length of oak for a project he hadn't decided on, ears tuned to the world beyond the hammer's ring. By mid-afternoon, the rain tapered off, replaced by a cool, damp light that softened the edges of the trees. At sunset, he set the chairs as always. The bear appeared earlier than usual, moving with the steady rhythm of something unhurried but purposeful. And this time, Eli saw it before it reached the porch. It wasn't alone. Behind the broad shadow was a smaller shape. Not cub small, but leaner, younger. The newcomer's coat was lighter, still with that faint unevenness of youth, the head swiveling more often, paws testing each patch of ground before committing weight. It kept close to the bear's flank, mirroring its pace. Eli's heart slowed and quickened at the same time. He stayed seated, hands resting on his knees, voice low and even. Evening. The big bear reached the steps first, pausing to glance back at the smaller one as if giving permission. The younger bear hesitated, sniffed the air, then climbed up. The boards creaked under unfamiliar weight. Eli noticed the way its nostrils flared, not just at him, but at the chair, the rung, the lingering scent of the tools inside. The older bear went straight to its chair, settling in with the ease of a habit long learned. The younger hovered, looking between Eli and the empty space beside its companion. Then, with a kind of clumsy dignity, it lowered itself onto the porch boards instead, curling its legs beneath and facing the meadow. Eli didn't mind. He knew chairs took time. Trust took longer. The evening light broke through the thinning clouds, streaking the meadow in gold. The older bear's head tilted toward the horizon, the younger kept scanning the forest. More than once, Eli saw its ears twitch toward sounds he couldn't hear, water shifting in the creek, maybe, or the light tread of something moving through undergrowth. At one point, the older bear shifted its paw onto the alder rung and gave a low, brief chuff. The younger bear turned to look, then reached out to rest a paw on the crossbar as well. The contact was tentative, like trying the first step of a bridge. Eli felt a slow smile build. "There you go," he murmured. They sat like that until the air cooled enough to carry the scent of wet pine down from the ridge. The sky deepened, the gold giving way to violet, then to the kind of blue that holds the first stars. The younger bear rose first, stepping back toward the older, and the two moved down the steps together. Before they reached the meadow's edge, the older bear stopped and looked back toward the porch. The younger followed its gaze, pausing just long enough for Eli to notice the flick of its ears, the way its eyes seemed to measure the distance. Then they turned and disappeared into the trees, the grass closing behind them. Eli sat for a while after they'd gone, the night coming on in quiet layers. There was a new weight in the air, not the cougar's tension, not the pull of danger, but the sense that the circle around this ritual had widened. Whatever surprise was coming had stepped onto his porch tonight, dripping with rain and cautious as a first handshake. Before turning in, he filled the basin with fresh water and set it closer to the chair. He didn't know if the younger bear would ever sit there, but he wanted it ready. Then he went inside, shut the door against the deepening dark, and stood for a long moment with his palm on the wood, feeling the faint tremor of the boards under his feet, as if the porch itself had learned something new. The next few days rewrote the rhythm of Eli's evenings. Some nights, the older bear came alone, stepping onto the porch with the same slow certainty as before, settling into its chair as if nothing had changed. Other nights, the younger one trailed behind, moving with hesitant curiosity, pausing at each step as if expecting the porch to shift under its weight. And once, on a still, warm Thursday, the younger bear arrived by itself. Eli had been oiling the hinges on the shed door when he noticed the movement at the meadow's edge. The shape was smaller, lighter in color, and its head was moving in quick, alert arcs. No heavy shadow followed. He set down the oil can, wiped his hands, and stepped quietly to the porch. The younger bear stood still for a moment, nostrils flaring, eyes fixed on him. Then it walked forward, less a stride, more a measured test of ground, until its paws touched the first step. Eli didn't speak. He just eased into his chair and leaned back, letting the creak of the rockers carry into the evening. The bear reached the top step and paused, sniffing the air, glancing toward the oversized chair, then to the water basin. After a long pause, it crossed to the basin and drank. The light was soft, sun slipping low, meadow turning gold at the edges. Eli watched without moving, letting the younger bear decide the distance between them. After drinking, it stepped toward the big chair, sniffed the alder rung, then put both paws on it. Not sitting, not yet, just standing there, feeling its shape. Eventually, it settled onto the boards, curling its body into the same loose rest Eli had seen before. From here, the bear could see both the forest and the man, and it seemed to prefer that middle ground. For nearly an hour, they sat in a strange, unspoken company. A hawk wheeled overhead, crickets tuned their evening song. The younger bear turned its head at every sound, filing each one away in the alertness of youth. When the light thinned to blue, the bear rose, gave a short sniff toward Eli, and stepped down into the meadow. It didn't rush. At the treeline, it paused, looking back, not for long, but long enough for Eli to feel the shift. This wasn't just passing through. It was considering the porch as part of its map. The next evening, the older bear returned. No younger one in sight. It climbed into its chair, paws on the rung, body settling with a faint exhale. Eli noted the absence but didn't ask for an explanation. These visits were never about questions. Still, his mind kept drifting back to the solo visit. It wasn't unusual for young bears to test their range, but this felt different. The way it had studied the chair, the basin, even him, like it was gathering pieces for something. That weekend, the two arrived together again. The older bear took its chair immediately, but the younger moved toward Eli instead, stopping halfway between them. He didn't shift in his seat. The bear's eyes met his, dark and steady, then it stepped toward the empty chair. This time, it climbed into it. The fit was awkward, the frame was built for the older bear's mass, but the younger adjusted, shifting its paws to the rung and looking out at the meadow in a near-perfect mirror of its companion. Eli let the silence work, feeling the air tighten with something close to recognition. When they left, they went together, side by side into the trees, their backs briefly lit by the last low spill of sunlight. That night, Eli found himself at his workbench, sketching without quite knowing why. 2 chairs, side by side, each with its own rung. One slightly smaller. One angled just enough to turn toward the other. He set the pencil down but didn't crumple the paper. Some ideas could wait until the time was right. By the time the first hints of summer edged into Redwood Hollow, Eli's mind had already settled on the project. The sketch of 2 bear-sized chairs sat on his bench for days, waited under an old plane blade so the breeze from the open window wouldn't shift it. Each time he passed by, his eyes landed on the angled placement, subtle, but enough to make it feel like the 2 chairs belonged to one another. The visits from both bears had grown steady, though not predictable. Some evenings they arrived together, other nights, one came alone. But the younger bear had climbed into the oversized chair twice more, awkwardly at first, then with a slow, testing comfort. Eli took that as permission. One morning, after the dew had lifted from the grass, he went to the pile of rough timber stacked along the shed wall. He chose alder again, not just for its strength, but for the connection it carried, the memory of the pale rung the older bear had gifted him. He measured, marked, and cut with the same care he gave every piece meant to last. As the frame began to take shape, he noticed something in the rhythm of his work. Each joint cut felt like an extension of the unspoken language that had formed between him and his visitors. He wasn't building for ownership. He was building for trust. It took 3 days to finish the frame, another 2 to fit the back slats and arms. The final detail was a smaller crossbar, set at a height to match the younger bear's stance. He left the wood bare, no varnish, just a hand-rubbed oil finish so it would weather naturally beside the first chair. On the evening he brought the chair to the porch, the sun was already leaning toward the ridge. He placed it beside the larger one, just far enough apart for space, but angled slightly inward. For a while, he sat alone, listening to the creek carry the day away in its low, steady voice. Then movement stirred at the meadow's edge. Both bears emerged together, the older leading, the younger close behind. They paused briefly at the clearing, their silhouettes framed by the warm, falling light. The older bear climbed onto the porch first, padding directly to its chair. It lowered itself with practiced ease, paws on the alder rung. The younger hesitated, eyes flicking between Eli and the new chair. Then it stepped forward, sniffed along the arms, and tested the rung with one paw. When it finally sat, it was almost cautious, back hunched slightly, paws resting lightly. But after a few moments, it shifted its weight, leaned back, and settled in as if realizing the fit had been made for it. Eli didn't smile wide, didn't want to break the quiet, but his chest loosened in a way it hadn't in years. The 3 of them sat together as the sky bruised into twilight, the chairs rocking slowly in the same rhythm. It was different from the evenings when only one bear came, less solitary, more like a gathering. The air felt thicker with something unspoken but understood. This was no longer an experiment. It was a ritual. As the light drained away, Eli noticed the older bear glance sideways at the younger, then toward the meadow. The younger hesitated before standing, almost reluctant to leave the new seat. They stepped down together, disappearing into the dark line of the forest. After they were gone, Eli stayed on the porch a while, listening to the night rise. 2 chairs now stood side by side, empty but not lonely. He knew they wouldn't always be filled, but their presence was a promise, waiting for paw and weight and the slow creak of wood under trust. That night, as he closed the door and latched it, he found himself thinking less about whether the bears would return tomorrow and more about how the chairs would look 20 years from now, weathered, scarred, but still standing. Like friendships that grow without needing to be named. The heat broke 2 days later. Morning came with a strange stillness, the air heavy enough to press on Eli's chest. He'd lived through enough seasons here to know what it meant, rain, and not the gentle kind. By mid-afternoon, the ridge was swallowed in a bank of charcoal clouds. Thunder rolled far off, the kind that traveled low to the ground, finding its way into the bones. Eli set the porch chairs closer to the wall and fetched an old wool blanket, more out of habit than need. He topped off the basin and checked the step for slick spots. The storm reached them just before sunset. Lightning flashed in sharp, white veins, followed seconds later by the drum of thunder. The rain began as a rush, drenching the meadow in moments, flattening the tall grass. The air filled with the smell of wet earth and pine sap. Eli sat in his chair, rocking slowly, eyes on the meadow. Part of him doubted the bears would come in this weather. They had shelter in the thick forest, dry hollows in fallen trunks. But habit made him wait anyway. And then he saw them. The older bear appeared first, moving steadily through the rain, water streaming off its coat in rivulets. The younger followed closely, its fur plastered dark, ears pinned slightly against the downpour. They crossed the meadow without pause, their shapes blurred by the sheets of water, until the porch's shadow took them in. The older bear shook itself once, sending a spray over the boards, then moved directly to its chair. It settled with the ease of muscle memory, paws finding the alder rung as though the weather were nothing. The younger hesitated just inside the porch line, dripping onto the boards, eyes flicking to Eli before stepping toward its own chair. When it climbed in, Eli noticed how the smaller frame fit snugly around it, almost as if it had been built for this moment. The bears sat side by side, the rain pounding the roof above, lightning splitting the sky beyond the meadow. Eli pulled the blanket over his knees and leaned back, letting the sound of the storm fill the space between them. For a long time, they just sat, three figures in the warm glow spilling from the open door, the air thick with rain and the faint creak of wood under shifting weight. The older bear occasionally glanced at the younger, and once Eli caught them both looking at him in the same heartbeat, as though acknowledging the circle they'd formed. When the wind picked up, rattling the porch rail, the younger bear stood and moved closer to the older one, resting its body against the larger frame. The older shifted slightly, making space without moving away. Eli felt something stir in his chest, not pride exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of seeing a thing take root. The storm eased just as the light finally drained from the sky, leaving the meadow glistening under a soft, wet darkness. The bears rose together, stepping down into the mud without hesitation. The younger looked back once from the grass, ears forward, as if committing the sight of the porch, of the chairs, of him, to memory. Eli watched until they were gone, the sound of their movement swallowed by the damp hush that follows rain. He stayed outside a while longer, letting the air cool around him. The chairs, still beaded with water, glistened faintly in the porch light. Inside, he left the door unlatched for the first time in years. He didn't know why, just that it felt right, as though this small gesture could carry across the meadow, into the trees, and tell the bears what he never could in words: "You're welcome here, no matter the weather." 2 evenings after the storm, the sky cleared into that rare, impossibly deep gold that only comes when the air has been scrubbed clean. The meadow shimmered in the low light, every blade and leaf still holding the memory of rain. Eli had been in his shop most of the day, oiling the rockers of the 2 bare chairs, making sure the rungs were tight and the joints sound. He didn't know if the chairs would see much use tonight. The bears' comings and goings had their own schedule, but the habit of readiness had become part of him. By the time the sun began to lean toward the ridge, the porch was in order, chairs set, basin filled, the smell of cedar shavings drifting from the open shop door. Eli eased into his seat, hands on the worn armrests, eyes tracing the familiar line from meadow to tree-line. The first movement came not from the forest, but from the far side of the meadow, where the grass dipped toward the creek. A large, dark shape emerged, steady and deliberate, the older bear. Behind it came the younger, head high, ears pricked forward. But there was something else. Trailing just behind, half hidden by the taller bear's flank, was a third figure, smaller even than the younger, its fur a pale, cinnamon-tinged brown. It moved with that unsteady, almost rolling gait of something still learning the weight of its own paws. Eli felt his chest tighten. The older bear crossed the meadow without pause, the younger keeping close. The smallest paused often, looking back toward the trees, then hurrying to catch up. By the time they reached the porch, the smell of the forest was thick around them, wet pine, earth, and something green and sharp from the undergrowth. The older bear went to its chair immediately, the younger to its own. The smallest stayed near the steps, lifting its nose to take in the new scents: wood oil, cedar shavings, the faint tang of metal from the water basin. Eli stayed still, letting the moment unfold. The younger bear turned its head toward the smallest, then looked at Eli. The gesture was unmistakable, even without words. "This one is with us." Slowly, the cub, or perhaps just a very young adolescent, approached the empty space between the two large chairs. It didn't try to climb in, but sat back on its haunches, watching the meadow the way the others did. Eli could see its breath, quick and shallow, the light catching in its fur. The three bears, each in their place, sat through the sunset together. The older shifted its paws on the alder rung, the younger leaning slightly toward it, the smallest tucked between them like a pebble between two larger stones. Eli felt the rhythm of their breathing in the creak of the porch boards, the slow rock of the chairs. As the light faded into that first blue shadow of night, the older bear stood, nudged the smaller with its muzzle, and stepped down. The younger followed, and the smallest hesitated, just long enough to glance back at Eli. The look was brief, but in it was the weight of something rare, recognition without fear. They disappeared into the trees together, the meadow swallowing their shapes. Eli stayed on the porch until the stars came out, the air cooling against his face. He knew then that the promise of the chairs had changed. They weren't just a place for two, they were part of a map that now included a third. The surprise had been carried across the meadow on 4 small, deliberate paws, and left in the quiet space between sunset and dark. He leaned back, letting the night settle over him, and smiled, not the fleeting kind, but the kind that stays even after you've gone inside.